Hi, my name's Adam. This is my classic car channel where you can see some vintage, original, rare cars. Today I'm going to be spotlighting my 67 Riviera. This is a factory black car with white bucket seat interior, so very rare combination, no vinyl roof either. The car still wears its original paint, original interior, has about 45,000 miles on it. And when a lot of people think of the Riviera, they often think of the first generation from 63 to 65, which is also a beautiful vehicle, or the boat tail years from 71 to 73. And I think this second generation Riviera gets forgotten in the mix. And yet, to me, it's one of the most beautiful looking cars ever designed, maybe worldwide, certainly in terms of American vehicles. As I walk around, you can see the light just breaking on these various crease lines, and just has some great lines on this car. This vehicle was styled like this really for 2 years, 66 and 67. 68, they redid the styling, had a big front loop bumper, really to kind of portray the air of safety, from what I understand. Had a big bumper, made it look like it was very well protected. But 66 and 67 Rivieras are generally quite similar, aside from a few details. The 67 has this horizontal theme with a thick bar in the middle of the grille that you can see here. The 66 does not. 67 introduced this really nice Riviera script denoting the nameplate. And the 66 has block lettering that spells Riviera in block letters across the front. And from a powertrain perspective, the 66 has the Buick Nailhead 425 cubic inch V8. This has the first year of Buick's then new 430 cubic inch V8 4-barrel engine with a quadrajet carburetor. So some powertrain differences, some badging differences, minor styling differences. But for all intents and purposes, the 66 and 7 are quite similar. So here's the bucket seats. The interior we'll spend a bit more time on as the video goes on. This car has the standard wheel discs. I do have a set of the turbine vanes wheel discs, which are actually interchangeable between the Riviera and the Corvette. So if you've seen the Corvette with those turbine vane wheel discs, the Riviera used the exact same ones, just the centers would change out to have an R for Riviera as opposed to the Corvette checkered flags. So this is a bucket seat car. It also has the optional headrest. The car doesn't have too many options. It does have an AM radio. It has a special order 2.73 to 1 rear end, which was a taller rear end, more for freeway gearing. I think the standard was a 3.08. Has air conditioning, and that's about it. These cars came standard, and the bucket seats. But the cars came standard with power steering, power brakes. These are Buick's aluminum fin brakes on here, which are pretty remarkable. So the outer brake drum is aluminum, and it's got a cast iron liner on it where the shoes wear, and this car stops fast. These were really good brakes for the time. I never feel like in a panic stop situation that I have to worry. Even most of the old drum brakes were just fine if you panic stopped once, then they faded after 2 or 3 rapid applications. This vehicle really just doesn't have any fade because the aluminum dissipates the heat quickly. So turning to the inside of the vehicle, by the way, this is before the era where GM made doors that sagged and kind of rattled when you close them. This is a nice solid feel when you close it, as opposed to the doors that came out starting in the early 70s. 70s, on the full-size cars in particular, but also the intermediates. a unique gauge cluster with this rolling drum speedometer, similar to what the Tornado had. But the Tornado had a different IP, different interior. This is unique. It's a little courtesy lamp there that you can see. The HVAC controls. This is interesting. If you want the defrost, there's not really a position for defrost. You just move this bottom lever to the right. This top one is the temperature. And you can see recirculation, normal vent, and heater. There are 3 outlets. This big center outlet and then 1 on either side. A very large ashtray in keeping with the time. And some wiper controls and pretty full gauge pod for the era. Most of these cars had idiot lights of this era, and this one has a temperature gauge, oil pressure, ammeter. So overall nice gauge pod. Interesting turn signals too. I'll turn the key on here and you can see the right and the left. Here's the center console. So nicely trimmed inside. Just latches closed. Has the Buick insignia with these little, I think they're reindeer. The Buick logo got a little less detailed in the latter years than what it was in these. Has kind of a perforated vinyl headliner, nice texture. No passenger rear view mirror. This is not the deluxe interior car, so these door panels are the standard door panels. The deluxe interior had more of a chrome theme, and you'll see that on some Rivieras. But this is the standard interior. It's quite nice. All vinyl seats. Some lights in the C-pillar back there, and a speaker in the middle, if the car is so equipped. Let's take a look under the hood for a moment. So all original engine bay, aside from somebody a long time ago added this 70s era spark control, whatever it is, capacitive discharge ignition system, supposedly to make, I think, your points more effective. I've disconnected it. I didn't notice any difference, but I thought the box was pretty humorous there. I do run all in my vehicle. Somebody was asking, do I run stock points or electronic ignition? I run just the stock point setup. In all my cars that have it, I find that it's reliable. I don't have any issues with it. If I do start to have some issues, the car starts running bad as opposed to just dying and leaving me on the side of the road. So I've had far more issues with electronic ignition over my lifetime than I have with points. I've never been stranded by an ignition system with points. I've been stranded 3 or 4 times by electronic ignition. So my personal preference. This car does have what's called a switch pitch turbohydromatic 400 transmission, which was made from 65 to 67 only. And for those who aren't familiar, that's what this switch is here. This is a kick down as well as a switch that activates the variable stall speed in the torque converter. So if you're at a stoplight or if you step on the pedal more than about 2/3 of the way, the stall speed in the transmission changes to a higher stall speed. So you don't get idle creep when you're sitting at the stoplight, and you get more power as the stall speed elevates. So when you step in the car and you push the pedal down about 2/3 of the way, it seems like it's a downshift, but it's actually not. It's just increasing the stall speed of the torque converter, and then if you step further, it will kick down. So only 65 to 7, only turbohydromatic 400s and 425s, which is the front wheel drive transmission, had that feature, which I think is stellar. So very popular among racers. After that, they just went to I'll say an in-between stall speed that was optimal, across all ranges of throttle, as opposed to this 2-speed variable pitch converter. Buick V8s are, for those who don't know, in this era, until about the mid to late 70s, every GM division engineered its own V8. So you could have a Chevrolet 350, Pontiac 350, Olds 350, Buick 350. There was no Cadillac 350, but each of those divisions, their motors were 100% different. Now, there were some shared components like distributors and carburetors and things like that, but the physical design of the motor was different. So that to me is a special thing about the GM cars of this era, is you get a totally different engine depending upon the vehicle that you're in. So this was Buick's first year of the 430 4-barrel carburetor motor. And in 67 and 68, this motor doesn't have hollow push rods, which means that most V8s and most push rod engines, you have hollow push rods and the oil circulates up through the push rod to lubricate the rocker arms. This motor for the first 2 years does not have that. So you want to make sure that when you start the vehicle that it runs quietly, there's no ticks or knocks, because if the person who owned it didn't change the oil, the galleys that would lubricate the upper portion of the valve train could clog and create some issues. This motor is perfectly silent, thankfully, but I just thought that was an interesting piece of trivia. These Buick V8s also have an aluminum timing cover, and if you have to replace the water pump, they're known for the bolts breaking off. I highly recommend, if you're going to have the water pump replaced, to go to a shop that has an induction heating tool that can heat the bolts up, which are ferrous metal, and it won't heat up the surrounding aluminum and risk warping it. There's a tool that I have called a Venom mini ductor. It's somewhat expensive, but pretty valuable in cases like this. If you want to change a water pump, you can't get a torch out here and heat the aluminum and everything else that's around it. That just provides very localized heat on the bolts and allows you to get them out without breaking off. So I found that very helpful. This car still runs R12. It is still frigidly cold, and as the name would say, frigid air, back when General Motors used to own frigid air. This is a 6-piston GM compressor, an excellent system that was used up until the late 70s, when they went to a radial style compressor. But there are 6 little pistons in here, 3 pointing this way, 3 pointing that way, that pump the refrigerant around. And you can see that the charge here is for Riviera 4¼ pounds of refrigerant. If you had a Ford of this era that had the York 2-piston compressor, they run about 2¾ pounds, 2.5, 2¾ pounds. So I love my Fords. Don't get me wrong, all my Ford friends, but in my opinion, the GM air conditioning systems of this era were better. They had way more cooling capacity. I mean, this thing is a 6-piston compared to a 2-piston. It's running 4¼ pounds of refrigerant compared to 2.5, 2.75. That's not to say that the Fords didn't cool. They did. You just were operating the air conditioning on high more than this does. I mean, this car will freeze you out. It was 90 degrees here today. I was running around with the air conditioning on, and I had it on just the medium fan setting. It's a 4-speed fan, and I had it on the 2nd speed, and I was just comfortable inside of a black car. Whereas my Fords, I would have that probably on high the whole time I was driving around. This is the 2nd year for the Quadrajet 4-barrel. Excellent carburetor. The only thing that I'm noticing is the ethanol fuel gets into a lot of the gasoline now. The accelerator pumps tend to go bad, and the nitrofill floats may get stuck and flood out, and you can have some typical needle problems, but generally these are very, very reliable, great power from the carburetors too. You can see how the headlight system on this car operates. They rotate downward when you turn the headlights on, and it's an electric motor. So I'll show you, I'll turn it on here, and you can watch. So they rotate downward, and they actually look really good down as well as up. So a lot of the non-GM cars of the era, the headlights, let me turn the lights off and keep the doors down so you can see. these headlights look pretty unfinished, but this has a nice look to it even when the headlights are down. This little spear went away in '68 for safety. I would hate to be bumped by this car as a passerby. This is not dulled. So the tip of that spear went away for safety in later years, but it sure looks good. Let's go take a look at the trunk. This car doesn't have a really large trunk. It does have the ventilation, the flow-through ventilation there that you'll see some rubber hoses. The water collects and then runs down inside the rear fender wells. Original jack. A decent amount of space. I mean, you could fit several sets of golf clubs in here. It's just not very tall overall. But not huge, not small. This is the spare tire well. So you can see spare tire in here. Double striped bias belted tire. So the Riviera was one of three, kind of a trio of vehicles. The Eldorado, the Tornado, and the Riviera were similar vehicles. The Tornado and the Eldorado were front-wheel drive. The Riviera was rear-wheel drive. And the Tornado and Eldorado both had three-quarter frames, a stop really ahead of the rear wheel. And the rear wheel, the suspension is a monoleaf spring on either side. The Riviera has full coils on all four corners, and it has a full X-frame. So I own an Eldorado, I've driven a Tornado. I will just say the Riviera rides much, much better than the Toro and the Eldo, which really don't have a great ride, and it's pretty boomy inside. That monoleaf rear spring is not something that really to brag about. I think it degrades the riding characteristics of the car, certainly compared to this car, like I said, that has full coils. They sold around 40,000 of these Rivieras in 1967, so it was a popular car, and you can see why. I mean, it's hard to understand if somebody went to the showroom and test drove this car in 1967, what they would pick at if you were looking for a personal luxury car. The car is smooth, it's quiet, it's good looking. I can't imagine somebody saying, gosh, this car is too smooth, too quiet, too good looking, I don't want it. And just really nicely detailed all around. So let's take it for a brief drive here. I'll start it up and you can hear the exhaust. I've got factory style dual exhaust with resonators on this, which is what would have come on it. That noise is just the headlight doors closing. All right, let's take it for a spin. So this motor was 360 or 65 horsepower. I'm not quite remembering how much, to be honest. One of the two, but it's very powerful, very peppy. No lack of power. I mean, this thing just pulls like a freight train. And it's got quite a bit of top end power too for a big motor. It revs, it likes to rev. I had a 70 Electra with a 455, and surprisingly that one liked to rev too. That came stock with a 256 rear end, and I remember that thing would kick down to second gear at 70 miles an hour and hold second gear to 90. I think first gear went to 50. So pretty amazing. You can see this rolling drum speedometer here. But just a joy to drive. Everything that I've featured so far has been a Ford vehicle, which I love my Fords of late 60s, early 70s. I do love the GMs as well. I have a few Mopars, but some of the GMs to me before 71, kind of in that 65 to 70 range, are really special, especially 65, 6, and 7. 68, 9, 70, they started decontenting the interiors and making them look not as nice, so they're not as nice as these earlier ones. But the motors and the transmissions are just beautifully smooth. The C6s and the Fords are great transmissions. They don't shift as smoothly as these turbo hydramatics do, or the 727 Chryslers. You feel the shifts in any Ford transmission I've had of the era, whether it's a C6, C4, FMX. I've had many versions of all of them, and you definitely feel the shifts in them. These, it's hard to detect sometimes when it's shifting. It's just buttery smooth. So here we go. That was about 2/3 throttle. But this car really can get up and move quite well. Again, compared to the Eldorado and Tornado counterparts, the Riviera I think has a lot better ride. The engines across all three are different, but I would say all excellent. The transmissions are similar. The turbo hydromatic 425 is effectively a 400 that it was split in half after the torque converter, and has about an inch thick chain drive that drives the transmission, and a final drive to drive the front wheels. Which interestingly was that system, the Oldsmobile V8 with that transmission, was used almost unaltered in the GMC motorhomes in the 70s. So it was super over-engineered for passenger car application, but very, very durable. In any case, hope you enjoyed this video. Of my 67 Riviera. If you liked the video, please subscribe to my YouTube channel, and I'll continue making more. Hope you enjoyed it. One last look around the interior. Here's a little light switch to turn the light on if you want. That's it. So long, everybody.